There's a photograph that shouldn't exist. It was taken in 1911, somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, and it shows 7 daughters standing in front of a white farmhouse. Their faces are pale, their dresses identical. By the time the photograph turned yellow with age, every single one of those girls was dead. Not one of them made it past her 12th birthday. Not one. The family name was Mercer, and for nearly a century, people in that county refused to speak it out loud. What happened to those girls wasn't an accident. It wasn't disease. It was something else entirely. Something that repeated itself, generation after generation, like a curse written into the family's blood. And the only reason we know about it today is because one girl, just one, lived long enough to break the silence. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Mercer family settled in Crawford County, Pennsylvania, in 1873. They were farmers, quiet people, the kind who kept to themselves and worked the land until their hands bled. For the first generation, nothing seemed unusual. But then the daughters started dying. It began with Eleanor Mercer in 1892. She was 12 years old when she collapsed in the kitchen one October morning. The doctor called it heart failure, though her heart had been perfectly healthy the week before. Her mother, Margaret, buried her in the family plot behind the barn and didn't speak for 3 months. 2 years later, Margaret gave birth to another daughter. They named her Clara. Clara died at 12, then came Rose, dead at 12, then Judith, dead at 12. By the time the 1900s arrived, the pattern was undeniable. Every daughter born to a Mercer woman died at exactly 12 years old. The sons lived, the fathers lived, but the daughters, every single one, were gone before they became teenagers. The town doctor stopped coming to the house. The neighbors stopped asking questions, and the Mercer family stopped expecting their daughters to survive. By 1920, the Mercer family had become something of a ghost story in Crawford County. People didn't talk about them directly, but their name came up in whispers at church socials and general stores. Mothers would pull their children closer when they passed the Mercer property. Old men would shake their heads and mutter about bad blood. The family had lost 14 daughters in less than 30 years. 14 little girls who never saw their 13th birthday. And yet, the Mercers kept having children, kept trying, as if they believed that eventually the pattern would break. What makes this story so disturbing isn't just the deaths themselves, it's how predictable they became. The girls would be healthy, normal children, laughing, playing, doing chores right up until their 12th birthday. Then something would shift. In the weeks leading up to that day, family members reported strange changes. The girls would become distant, quiet. They'd stop eating as much. Some of them complained of dreams they couldn't remember. Others would stare out windows for hours, as if watching something no one else could see. And then, within days or weeks of turning 12, they would die, sometimes in their sleep, sometimes while doing ordinary tasks. One girl, Anna Mercer, died while hanging laundry. She simply stopped mid-motion, dropped the clothespin, and collapsed. The causes of death varied just enough to avoid suspicion from outside authorities. Heart failure, seizures, unexplained fevers, pneumonia that came on impossibly fast. But anyone who looked closely could see the truth. These girls weren't dying of natural causes. They were dying because they were Mercer daughters, and Mercer daughters didn't survive childhood. The family physician, a man named Dr. Howard Pendleton, kept meticulous records. His journals, discovered decades later in a courthouse basement, reveal his growing horror. In 1898, he wrote, "I can find no medical explanation for the death of Rose Mercer. Her organs were sound. Her blood showed no disease. It is as if her body simply decided to stop living." By 1905, his entries became shorter, more resigned. He stopped trying to explain it. He just recorded the deaths and moved on. The Mercer men, meanwhile, seemed almost numb to it. They buried their daughters with the same grim efficiency they used to slaughter livestock. There was no rage, no desperate search for answers, just acceptance. And that acceptance might be the most chilling part of all. It suggests they knew something they never wrote down, never told the authorities, never even discussed among themselves. Whatever was killing their daughters had become part of the family's identity. They expected it. They lived around it. And they kept it secret. When the First World War ended in 1918, America tried to return to normalcy. But there was no normalcy for the Mercer family. If anything, the deaths were accelerating. Between 1918 and 1935, 11 more daughters died. The family tree, which someone painstakingly reconstructed from county records in the 1980s, looks like a graveyard. Branch after branch ends abruptly at age 12. Some branches have 3, 4, even 5 daughters, listed all with death dates clustered within years of each other. The sons, meanwhile, grew up, married, had children of their own. And the cycle continued. What's particularly haunting is how the family adapted. They stopped celebrating birthdays for girls after age 11. There are accounts from former neighbors people interviewed in the 1970s and 80s before they died who remembered this detail vividly. One woman, Dorothy Haynes, recalled playing with a Mercer girl named Catherine in 1927. "We were both 11, Dorothy said in a recorded interview. But when I asked Catherine about her birthday party, she looked at me like I'd said something terrible. She told me her family didn't do that anymore, didn't do birthdays. I asked why, and she just walked away. 3 months later, she was dead. The Mercer daughters grew up knowing they were going to die. Think about that for a moment. Imagine being 8 years old, 9 years old, and watching your older sister waste away and vanish. Imagine knowing, with absolute certainty, that the same thing would happen to you. How does a child process that? How does a mother? Some of the girls tried to run away. There are police reports from 1923 and 1930 documenting Mercer daughters found wandering miles from home, claiming they didn't want to go back. They were always returned, and they always died on schedule. By the 1930s, the family had retreated almost entirely from public life. They stopped attending church, stopped going to town except when absolutely necessary. The farm became increasingly isolated, surrounded by untended fields and collapsing outbuildings. Neighbors reported seeing lights in the windows at strange hours, hearing sounds they couldn't identify, not quite screams, not quite singing. One man, interviewed years later, claimed he saw a group of young girls standing in the Mercer yard at midnight, all wearing white nightgowns, all perfectly still. When he drove past again 20 minutes later, they were gone. He never reported it. Nobody wanted to get involved with the Mercers. Whatever was happening on that property, people decided it was better left alone. In 1938, a young physician named Dr. Samuel Kowalski arrived in Crawford County fresh from medical school in Philadelphia. He was ambitious, modern, and determined to bring scientific rigor to rural medicine. When he heard rumors about the Mercer family, he didn't dismiss them as superstition. He decided to investigate. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. Dr. Kowalski managed to gain the trust of Thomas Mercer, the family patriarch at the time, and was allowed to examine 3 of Thomas's daughters, Marie, Helen, and little Ruth. All 3 were between the ages of 9 and 11. All 3 appeared perfectly healthy. He drew blood samples, checked their hearts and lungs, examined their reflexes and cognitive function. Everything was normal. He documented his findings in a private journal that his grandson would later donate to a historical society. In his notes, Dr. Kowalski wrote, "These children show no signs of illness whatsoever. They are bright, well-nourished, and physically sound. Yet their father speaks of their upcoming deaths with the certainty most men reserve for discussing the weather. When I pressed him on this, he simply said, 'You'll see, doctor, you'll see.'" Dr. Kowalski saw. Marie Mercer died 4 months after his examination. She was 12 years and 6 days old. The cause, according to the death certificate, was acute respiratory failure. But Dr. Kowalski's private notes tell a different story. He wrote, "I was called to the Mercer home at 2 in the morning. Marie was already gone. Her body was still warm, her eyes open, but there was no breath, no pulse. I have never seen a corpse look so aware, as if she had seen something in her final moments that froze her in terror. The family showed no grief. They simply asked me to sign the certificate so they could bury her before dawn." He tried to push for an autopsy, The family refused. He contacted the county coroner, who told him to drop it. "Those people handle their own business," the coroner said. "Always have. Best you do the same." Dr. Kowalski didn't drop it. He began researching the family history, pulling records from 3 different counties, interviewing old-timers who remembered previous generations. What he discovered was a death pattern stretching back over 60 years, dozens of girls, all dead at 12, and not a single official investigation. He wrote letters to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. He contacted medical journals. He even reached out to a psychiatrist in Pittsburgh, wondering if there was some form of mass delusion or family-induced psychosomatic illness at play. Nobody wanted to touch it. The few responses he received suggested he was wasting his time on rural folklore. One colleague wrote back, "You're chasing shadows, Sam. Some families are just unlucky. Leave it alone." But Dr. Kowalski couldn't leave it alone. He watched Helen Mercer die in 1940, then Ruth in 1942, both at age 12, both with no medical explanation. By 1943, Dr. Kowalski stopped practicing medicine. He left Crawford County and never spoke publicly about the Mercers again. But his journal survived, and in it, he wrote one final entry. "There is something in that bloodline, something that cannot be explained by science or reason. I believe those girls are being killed, but not by human hands." Her name was Elizabeth Mercer, and she was born in 1947. She was the daughter of Robert Mercer and his wife, Grace. By the time Elizabeth came into the world, the family had lost 32 daughters over 74 years, 32 girls who never lived to see 13. Elizabeth would be the 33rd, and everyone, including Elizabeth herself, knew what that meant. Elizabeth's early childhood was documented through a series of letters she wrote much later in life, letters that were donated to a women's history archive in the 1990s. In them, she describes growing up in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The walls were covered with photographs of dead sisters, cousins, and aunts, all young girls frozen in time, staring out from faded frames. Her mother rarely spoke. Her father worked from dawn until dark, avoiding the house whenever possible. Elizabeth had 2 older brothers who treated her with a strange mixture of affection and distance, as if they didn't want to get too attached to someone who wouldn't be around much longer. "I knew I was going to die," Elizabeth wrote. "Everyone told me, not with words but with their eyes, with their silence, with the way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. On my 10th birthday, my mother gave me a locket with her own mother's hair inside. She told me I should wear it always. I understood what she meant. It was a goodbye gift, given 2 years early." As Elizabeth approached her 12th birthday in 1959, the family began preparing for her death. They purchased a burial plot. They had a dress made white, with lace at the collar, sized for a child's coffin. Her mother cleaned out a room in the attic where Elizabeth's belongings would be stored after she was gone, the way they'd stored the belongings of all the other dead daughters. Elizabeth watched all of this happen. She participated in her own pre-funeral arrangements, and something inside her began to break apart. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? 2 weeks before her 12th birthday, Elizabeth did something no other Mercer daughter had ever done. She started asking questions, not polite questions, demanding questions. She confronted her father in the barn and asked him point-blank why the daughters died. He told her to go back to the house. She refused. She asked her mother where the curse came from. Her mother slapped her and locked her in her room. But Elizabeth didn't stop. She searched the house while her parents slept. She went through old trunks in the attic, read family letters, pulled up floorboards looking for hidden documents, and then, 3 days before her 12th birthday, she found it. Hidden beneath a loose stone in the basement was a metal box. Inside was a journal, written in 1873 by the first Mercer woman to settle in Crawford County. Her name was Abigail Mercer, and what she had written explained everything. The journal was written in faded ink on pages that crumbled at the edges. Elizabeth read it by candlelight in the basement, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the book steady. What Abigail Mercer had written wasn't a confession. It was an instruction manual, a set of rules passed down from mother to daughter, generation after generation, explaining how to keep the family alive, and the price that had to be paid. Abigail Mercer had come to America from somewhere in Eastern Europe. The journal never specifies exactly where, but mentions traveling through villages that no longer exist on any map. She came with her husband, William, and she came carrying something else, a debt. According to her writing, her own mother had made a bargain generations earlier with something Abigail called the Keeper of Thresholds. The details are vague, written in the fearful language of someone who doesn't want to say too much. But the core of it was this. The women of the bloodline had been given protection. Their sons would be strong, their husbands would prosper, their farms would never fail. But in exchange, every daughter had to be returned at the age of 12. Returned. That was the word Abigail used. Not killed, not sacrificed. Returned. As if the girls had been borrowed and were simply going back to where they came from. The journal described a ritual that had to be performed on each daughter's 12th birthday. It involved specific words spoken in a language Abigail wrote phonetically, but didn't understand. It involved the girl being brought to a particular place. Abigail called it the old room, though she never specified where this room was. And it involved the family standing witness while the girl was given back to the threshold. What happened in that room was never explicitly described, but Abigail wrote that after the ritual, the daughter would die within days, sometimes hours. They do not suffer, she wrote, or if they do, it is brief. This is the mercy we are granted. The keeper takes them gently, like a mother lifting a sleeping child. We are allowed to bury them. We are allowed to grieve, but we are not allowed to resist. Elizabeth read those words over and over. We are not allowed to resist. For 74 years, her family had obeyed. They had performed this ritual on daughter after daughter, watching them die, burying them in the family plot, and never once telling anyone the truth. They had normalized it, made it part of the family routine, like planting season or Sunday dinner. The men married women from outside the family, women who were brought into the secret after the wedding, women who were told this was simply how things were. Some of those women tried to leave. According to loose papers tucked into Abigail's journal, at least 3 wives had attempted to run away with their daughters. All 3 were found dead under mysterious circumstances. Their daughters died at 12 anyway. But here's what broke Elizabeth's mind more than anything else. The ritual wasn't automatic. It required participation. The family had to perform it. The parents had to bring their daughter to the old room. They had to speak the words. They had to stand there and watch, which meant that every single death, all 32 girls before Elizabeth, had been carried out by the family itself. Not passively allowed, actively executed. Elizabeth closed the journal. She sat in that basement for hours, her 12th birthday now just 2 days away, and she made a decision. She would not go to the old room. She would not let them speak the words, and if that meant breaking the bargain her ancestor had made, then so be it. She would rather die fighting than die obedient. On the morning of her 12th birthday, October 14th, 1959, Elizabeth Mercer woke before dawn. She dressed quietly, packed a small bag with food and clothing, and climbed out her bedroom window. She had no plan beyond survival, no destination beyond away. She just knew she couldn't be in that house when her father came to collect her. She ran through the fields behind the property, her breath coming in ragged gasps, expecting at any moment to hear footsteps behind her, but no one followed. Not yet. She made it to the main road and flagged down a truck driver who was hauling grain to Pittsburgh. She told him she was visiting her aunt. He didn't ask questions. By noon, Elizabeth was 70 miles from Crawford County, sitting in a bus station with $3.40 in her pocket, waiting to see if she would die. Because according to everything she'd read, every daughter who reached 12 was taken. The ritual didn't cause the death, it completed it. Without the ritual, she didn't know what would happen. Maybe she would die anyway. Maybe whatever her ancestor had bargained with would come for her regardless. But the day passed, then another, then a week. Elizabeth survived by cleaning rooms at a boarding house in exchange for a bed and meals. She told the owner, her name was Beth Miller, that she'd run away from an abusive home. It wasn't entirely a lie, and as the weeks turned into months, something impossible happened. She kept living. Her 13th birthday came and went. Then, her 14th. The curse, it seemed, could be broken, but not without consequences. Back in Crawford County, the Mercer family was falling apart. Elizabeth learned this years later from newspaper clippings and county records. Within 6 months of her disappearance, her father Robert died in a farming accident. His tractor rolled over him in a field where the ground was perfectly flat. Her mother Grace developed a rapid form of cancer and was dead within 4 months. Her 2 brothers both died before age 30, one in a car crash, one from a sudden heart attack. The farm was foreclosed on and sold at auction. The Mercer name, which had endured in that county for 86 years, simply vanished. It wasn't just her immediate family. Over the next decade, every living member of the Mercer bloodline experienced catastrophic misfortune. Businesses failed, marriages dissolved, children were stillborn. People developed mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't diagnose or treat. By 1975, there were no Mercers left in Pennsylvania. The family had been erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. The only one who survived was Elizabeth, and she survived because she had run. She spent the rest of her life trying to understand what had happened. She researched folklore, consulted with historians and anthropologists, even traveled to Eastern Europe trying to trace her family's origins. She never found definitive answers, but she found enough. Stories of similar bargains made by desperate people in desperate times, deals with entities that operated on their own incomprehensible logic, protections that came with unbearable prices, and always, the pattern of the women paying the cost. Elizabeth never married, never had children. She said it was because she couldn't risk passing the bloodline forward, couldn't risk creating another daughter who might be claimed. She lived quietly, worked as a librarian, and kept her story to herself until 1993, when she was 66 years old and dying of emphysema. That's when she wrote everything down. The journal she'd found, the ritual, the deaths, her escape. She donated her papers to a women's history archive with instructions that they remain sealed until after her death. She died in 1994. The archive opened her collection in 1995, and that's how the world finally learned what had happened to the Mercer daughters, not from police reports or medical investigations or newspaper articles, from the testimony of the only girl who lived long enough to tell the truth. The Mercer property in Crawford County still exists. It's been through several owners, none of whom stay long. People report strange occurrences, the sound of children crying in empty rooms, doors that open and close by themselves, a persistent smell of earth and flowers, like a fresh grave. Local historians have tried to excavate the family plot, hoping to provide proper burials for the 32 girls buried there. But every attempt has been blocked by technical difficulties, legal challenges, or mysterious accidents. Elizabeth Mercer's final written words were these: "I survived because I refused to be returned. But survival is not the same as freedom." I hear them sometimes, my sisters and cousins and aunts, all the daughters who went before me. They call to me in dreams, asking why I left them behind, and I have no answer, except this: I wanted to live. I wanted to live more than I wanted to obey. That makes me either the bravest or the most selfish girl in my family's history. I'll let history decide which. The photograph, from 1911, the one showing 7 daughters standing in front of the white farmhouse, still exists. It's in the Crawford County Historical Society, filed under Mercer family deceased. If you look closely at the faces of those girls, you can see it. They're not smiling. They're not even looking at the camera. They're looking past it, at something behind the photographer, something the rest of us can't see. And in their eyes, there's no fear, just resignation. They already know how their stories end. Elizabeth's story ends differently. She lived to be 67 years old. She died in a hospital bed, surrounded by nurses who didn't know her real name, holding a locket that contained her grandmother's hair. Her last words, according to the nurse who recorded them, were, "I kept my promise. I stayed away." Nobody knew what promise she meant, but maybe she wasn't talking to the living. The Mercer curse is over now. The bloodline is extinct. The bargain, broken by Elizabeth's refusal, collapsed on itself and took everyone with it, except the one who ran. There are no more daughters to return, no more rituals in hidden rooms. No more families pretending this is simply the way things are. There's just silence, and 32 graves in Pennsylvania soil, and one woman's testimony, preserved in an archive, waiting for people like you to find it and wonder, what would you have done? If you were 12 years old and you knew they were coming for you, would you have run? Or would you have gone to the old room like all the others, obedient to the end? That's the question Elizabeth Mercer forces us to ask. And it's the question that makes this story so much more than just a ghost tale from rural America. It's about the price we pay for security, the bargains we make without understanding the cost, and the courage it takes to say no, even when everyone around you insists that this is just the way things have always been. Elizabeth said no. She ran, she survived, and in doing so, she made sure that at least one voice from that family would live long enough to speak the truth. Thank you for watching. If this story affected you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think really happened in that old room. And remember, history isn't just what's written in textbooks. Sometimes the darkest truths are the ones families bury in their basements and hope no one ever finds.